everyone, Rascal here.
And Mama, welcome to another Spotty podcast.
Today we're covering by far the best animated Spider-Man series.
Spectacular Spider-Man. This Marvel series is your basic plot line of Peter Parker balancing his life as a high schooler and superhero, but it's anything but ordinary as villains appear left and right. Some are easy villains of the week, trying to get rid of the webslinger, while others can hit close to home.
And it's Josh Keaton! Yes, that is the main reason you want to watch this.
Thank you, Bennet.
Yes, it totally do. He says, your mom's favorite voice actors in here. And like, yeah, okay, I'll make her watch it.
Written by Greg Weisman of Young Justice fame, before Young Justice fame, and some other writers, but the main one we're paying attention to is Greg Weisman.
Right. Like, all of them are important, but that's the one we focus on.
Yes. And there were some other great voice actors as well besides Josh Keaton that we'll get into.
Right. So,
this was spectacular.
Right.
There's no way to describe it. Spectacular.
Right. That's the perfect title. Mm-hmm. And I have never seen really any of the Spider-Man series. I know you have told me which ones you've watched, growing up or what came on TV at the time. Mm-hmm. And I had heard of Spectacular Spider-Man, and I always hear from a bunch of Spider-Man fans that this was the best Spider-Man series that came out because they really couldn't stand Ultimate Spider-Man. Mm-hmm. And, the new Spider-Man is kind of... I guess it depends on you look at it, if you like all the changes or not. So it can be good for some and can be bad for others. But for Spectacular Spider-Man, I knew this was the one I said was the best one out of all the series. Mm-hmm. And heard of it, never seen it, never watched it on TV live or on demand, none of that. So I saw that they had made lots of videos about it. And I asked him, what it was about, should I watch it? And he was rampant on telling me to watch it and to make sure that you watched it with me, mm-hmm. to tell you that Josh Keaton was the voice of Spider-Man, your favorite voice actor. So it would secure the fact that you would watch it with me.
And we successfully purchased it as a result.
Right. And we watched both seasons. We have the complete series on DVD. Mm-hmm. And we loved every single episode that they had.
And that is a rarity where you don't find, there's this one I just didn't care for, but yes, every episode was spectacular.
Right. And this time, now Marvel seems to really love doing crossovers a bunch of other of their properties with Spider-Man. I mean, Spider-Man gets visited by the Avengers, and he'll never become an Avenger apparently in that series. He gets visited by a Deadpool, Cloak and Dagger, Howard the Duck, Guardians of the Galaxy, the Hulk. He'll get everybody in the Marvel Universe to cross over in his show. Mm-hmm. But in here, it just stays Spider-Man. There's not any reference to the Avengers or any of the other Marvel characters. They only stick with Spider-Man only, which is a relief because that wouldn't make it more complicated than it already had to be.
Right. You have to remember when this originally premiered, it was back in 2008, so mm-hmm. they weren't really doing the crossover thing very heavily.
Right.
And really were not that interested in the MCU universe.
Right. That's when it was just starting with Iron Man. I was like the
MCU?
First. No, it's MCU.
Okay.
And, Iron Man just came out at the time of this show, so that's when the cinematic universe was just starting. Mm-hmm. And at the time this came out, they had 2 seasons. They were planning probably, I think, a 3rd season and beyond, because it looked like they were going to do lots of seasons, and even plan some DVD movies that would take place in between seasons, like with My Little Pony and My Hero Academia.
We would have loved to see both of those.
Right. And they also would have had pretty much leading up all the way to him as an adult, and who he ends up with, and finishing out unresolved storylines. It would have been pretty much a complete Spider-Man story. Mm-hmm. But after Disney bought Marvel at the time, it was not too long after the cinematic universe had started, Disney bought Marvel and pretty much canceled this series because of legal reasons. They owned it, and they wanted to just start from scratch with an all-new series that just basically had the standard Disney tone with a bunch of teen superheroes working together and cameos from every Marvel character ever. Mm-hmm. And then that's when people started now liking Ultimate Spider-Man because it was so far from this show and it having heart and talent and stuff behind it. Mm-hmm. I personally never seen it, but what I'm hearing from a lot of people and fans, that's probably their least or second least favorite next to the 2017 animated Spider-Man series.
I think for this show, this is the one that closely to me resembles Tom Holland's Spider-Man.
Yes.
And I think that's why Tom Holland's Spider-Man is so successful, because it reminds me of the Spectacular Spider-Man character.
Mm-hmm.
There's that wholesomeness that comes through. There's a sort of innocence. You really like the character. You really he's a good guy. You see the struggle with him trying to be the best he can be, and at the same time handle teen life, dealing with the after effects of the death of his uncle. You see so much going on, and you like to say that he's a very humanized character.
Right.
And Tom Holland's Spider-Man is also very humanized, and all that comes through for him.
Right.
So I also want to say again that Greg Weisman is not only a writer, he's also one of the developers and a producer for this. So he did a whole lot of work on this show, and you can see elements of his writing style and his production style coming through if you've watched Young Justice seasons 1 and 2 prior to the reboot. You know his signature, and it's in here, but there's not too much of it. It's just enough for you to know it was Greg Weisman, but you can also see the influence of the other people who worked on him with it, but it's definitely got Greg Weisman's signature stamp. Right.
And another great thing about the show, before we get into, the characters and the villains and the voice actors, is that this was around the time when people still had the variety of cartoons where it could be comedy, action, or a mixture and a blend. And this was one of them, and it was like with Teen Titans and Generator Rex. You can even hear some Teen Titans music in there a little bit. And it was great because it could balance comedy and action and drama and story, even a bit of horror when it came to Venom and some of the scenes that could kind of freak you out if you're not careful. And it was a great blend that unfortunately you don't see as much anymore unless it's an online series, and you don't really see it much on TV. So we really have to commend all of the writers and producers, and of course Stan Lee and I think Steve Steve Ditko, who all had a hand in this and just made it very enjoyable for all ages, and to this day it still has a legacy of being the best animated interpretation of Spider-Man. Heck, they even referenced the live-action trilogy they had with Tobey Maguire. There's a lot of references to it.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the main cast first off. Of course, Josh Keaton was excellent. And I think for me what was really fantastic is it did not have there were no indications that this was Josh Keaton. I mean, you didn't hear any of the intonations you usually hear when he does a character, and he'll say something and you'll go, that's Josh Keaton. There was none of that there. He perfectly voice acted and portrayed this character. So fantastic job. I first want to mention some of the ones that surprised me before we talk about them all. One that surprised me was James Arnold Taylor as Harry Osborn. I was really, really shocked that it was one of America's most hated animated kid voice doing this character. Johnny Test. I'm
like, oh my god.
I was really surprised. And I was also surprised that it was Cosmo, Darren Norris, doing J. Jonah Jameson. It was a shock because you've heard him doing Cosmo so much. But then he did this character, and I know he does that too, but still, it was just a shock to hear him consistently be this character. So those two are the surprises for me. And now let's get into the rest of the regular cast.
We have Kevin Michael Richardson as Tombstone, or the Big Man. Lacey Chabert.
Now, he was after the first episode. The first episode was Keith David. Because I said, that's Keith David. Oh my gosh. And then after that, the second episode was, that's not Keith David. So we learned that he was only
for one
Big
episode.
Man for one episode.
It looks like maybe he was too big at the time to afford every episode, so they got Kevin Michael Richardson to do the rest, which was fine because it was almost identical sounding like him. Had Lacey Chabert as Gwen Stacy. I was like, what? You have Vanessa Marshall as Mary Jane Watson. Steve Blum as the Green Goblin.
A lot of people. A lot of characters. He was used a lot.
You definitely remember Clancy Brown, aka Lex Luthor, as the Rhino, and George Stacy. And then some other people they had in here that were either like maybe one-off characters or guest appearances or villains.
And Asner!
Yes.
Parker.
Right. And let's see, Nikki Cox as Silver Sable, I think.
Bradley Baker.
Right. And
we can just name some of the people here. Jim Cummings, if we mentioned Keith David.
John DiMaggio.
Crispin Freeman.
Brian George, Miguel
Bill Fagerbaki.
Right.
And Robert Englund. And it was so funny because the character he was portraying had on the Freddy Krueger sweater.
Right.
And that was your first hint. It was him.
Right. We couldn't stop laughing at that.
And of course you had favorites. Phil Lamar, Kelly Hu, Brian George.
Crispin Freeman.
And then we also had Dorian Harewood, who is one of our Nana's favorite actors, and it was really surprised to see him.
Right.
Cree Summer, Kathy Soucie.
BJ Ward, Greg Wiseman actually did an episode. And
Danny Trejo.
Right. And Jane Lynch as Jameson's wife.
Yes.
And then probably the best one of all, of course, Stan Lee, appearing as a guy named Stan, just sitting around talking. But of course, we had to get that in there.
Yes. So the story was well told within the 2 seasons that it had. Of course, we would have loved to have seen it gone on to a 3rd season, but alas, it wasn't meant to be. Would we like to see it picked up again and rebooted with all the other reboots? Yes. And Josh Keaton could definitely reprise his role, and so could James Arnold Taylor.
Right.
And so could most of the actors that did the voice acting because they sound exactly the same. So I would love to see a reboot, the story pick up and continue, and hopefully the writers could, I'm sure they would probably update it. But we can continue it off from the cliffhanger where it left off. Mm-hmm. And have the same voice actors return. Don't get any new people. Have the ones that we like because they sound the same. Mm-hmm. And just go ahead and give us a reboot like every other studio on Earth is doing right now.
Right.
We want this one.
Right. And like I said, it was supposed to go on for 65 episodes and have a lot of straight-to-DVD movies that would have shown like events in between seasons and ones that would show Peter Parker growing up and getting to marriage and pretty much telling his whole entire story. Mm-hmm. But it only made it to the 52 episodes, so it only made half, which was kind of like the almost foreshadowing of what happened with Thundercats 2011, where they only got to make half the story, mm-hmm. and because of rights or buyouts or expenses, they didn't want to keep going, and they just wanted to start over with something else.
So it's said that they had to stop production due to legal problems with Disney. Does this sound familiar? Hint, hint. MCU Spider-Man. It seems that Disney really wants to possess this particular franchise wholly.
Right.
And, that may also impact us getting a reboot. If it's called reboot or
reboot or revival or something like that. Like really Samurai Jack.
Revival. Absolutely need a revival, and it picks up with the story where it left off. So let's just keep our fingers crossed that this can happen, because again, they're rebooting everything.
Right.
And this is one of the reboots, or what did you say it may be called?
A revival where they pick up where they left off and finish the story. Absolutely. Or a TV movie.
So I would like a revival, not a reboot. And this is one that will be very, 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 very much wanted by the fandom, all over.
Right.
So, hear us Disney, hear us Marvel, however you want to call yourself with this. Give us a revival and a continuation with this story. Finish the remaining episodes. Let it finish as it was meant to be.
Right.
Hire the same writers, including Greg Wiseman, mm-hmm. the same people, and give the people what they want. Give us what we want.
Right.
Please, please, please.
And definitely now I talk about the villains and the characters in here, because they had quite a lot of them. For only 2 seasons at the time, there were a lot of villains and characters introduced just about every episode, whether main or antagonist or side or minor, and all of them had a role to play in the story.
And there were some villains that we didn't expect to see, and there were some people that actually became villainous that were really a surprise, and also there were some that took an arc from other books that we didn't expect. And it was great. Like you said, they had some great villains, and they had some twisters at the end of the
series or the season?
The end of the season cliffhanger for season 2. That if you haven't seen it, even though it's 2008, we don't want to spoil it for you. If you haven't seen this, you really have to see it.
Right, because we
really had to see it.
Right, we're like, what the heck? Now, for the villains, they start out with Vulture, who looks obviously different from Michael Keaton.
Much different.
Yeah. And then they start getting to the more recognizable ones like Dr. Octopus, the Chameleon, Tombstone, the Lizard, Rhino, Sandman, and eventually they started adding in Mysterio, who wouldn't shut up for 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. You had Venom, who was the biggest threat. And, of course, the ever-popular Green Goblin. Mm-hmm.
Now, Venom, how they did him in here was really close to the Tobey Maguire movie.
Right.
Remember I told you that was my least. I love the trilogy with Tobey Maguire. I'm loving Tom Holland. But my least favorite one was the movie that contained Venom. And this particular storyline really did a great job of making that particular protagonist and what's the word I'm looking
antagonist
for?
or
okay, I'm gonna say protagonist and symbiote relationship really work effectively in this animated series. It was more like a live action adaptation more than animation. It really worked well. And what was really I don't like this Venom. And you were like, you're not supposed to. I don't like this Venom. I don't like this storyline. You're like laughing at me because it was like just that great. Where it was written that well. And performed that perfectly.
And when you get down to, when we remember seeing the movie, it kind of fed off of hate and anger and negative emotions. And here they kind of took it like a step further. It still did that, but it started being more of like a comfort for, like this time around they had with, Get Attached to Peter, and he would use all the time when the spider suit and was doing what he wanted at first, and then when it looked like he wanted to, get rid of it, it started getting worse. It was changing his personality. He wasn't being the friendly neighborhood spider anymore. He's getting more violent. And, he realized he had to get it out.
And then Ed Asner, Uncle Ben, has to come and help him.
Right. And then when it got to, of course, who gets it the next time, when it sort of has this really disturbing side effect, not counting Peter because he was able to fight it off enough and keep it off. It was almost like a drug where if Eddie didn't have it, it was more like this relationship, and they were kind of just, and it wasn't like they were playing it off. They were playing it straight as an actual relationship between the host and the symbiote. And if they got rid of it, it was like they had a breakup.
The parasite in the host. The Venom really truly acted more of a parasite on Eddie than it did on Peter.
Right, and like Peter had more of a strong will, so he wasn't, part of him wasn't like, I want it back or anything like that. For Eddie, it was a whole different story. And so they were really pushing the envelope for children to watch this because it was probably worse than the Venom movie had. And we haven't even seen it yet.
And what made it more powerful about this storyline is that at one point, Peter thought he and Eddie were friends, but when he was with that parasite, he was like, I was never your friend. And this is how he felt. And it was a shock not only to Peter, but to us viewers that he felt like this, thinking they were brothers because of what happened with their parents all along. So it was just really well written, very fantastically done. Quickly go over some of the villains for season 2 you want to mention?
Definitely want to talk about Green Goblin, and they had the Sinister Six, which a lot of people I know really enjoy seeing Dr. Octopus and Electro and many of the fan favorites on there in one group that he had to fight off. But I think pretty much the showstopper was Green Goblin because he was instantly my favorite villain of the series when he appeared.
Okay.
And like I said, what happens, and this time around, you don't know who is Green Goblin this time around.
Right.
You don't know if it's the dad or the son or both or what or a third person.
Right.
So you would have to watch to find out who is it, because you're thinking they could be basing off the movie, they could be doing the comics, or they could be doing their own thing. So it's really is a guessing game. You can't figure it out until you see it.
Right. And again, great season cliffhanger finale that we need to have finished with a revival.
Right.
So if you've seen this series like Bennet Dudley, let us know what you think in the comments below. Who's your favorite character? And if, like Rascal, you have a favorite villain, who is that too? Would you like to see a revival? Would you like to see Josh Keaton back? Or hear him back as Spectacular Spider-Man?
Yes, Shiro!
And if you haven't seen it, then it's available to purchase on Amazon. We got it for a great price. You can rent it on Amazon as well, but you cannot get it from Redbox, and it absolutely, positively, unfortunately, is not on Netflix.
Right, unless Disney has something to do with it. So, thank you so much for watching, and make sure to leave some comments below, of course, whether you've seen it or not or want to see it.
Yeah.
Right. I'm Aska Entertainment.
And I'm Mom Entertainment.
Have a toontastic day.
Peace.
And reporters sitting flashing lights, trying to walk around, man, who the hell are you? What you wanna do? Well, man, it's on you. Man, it's on you. With her in my dreams, she was my queen. A castle in the mountaintops, rivers and streams. Plucking sunlight from the sky in my pocket. Give it to you later on in the form of a locket.